I call to order the special Finance Committee meeting on May 27th. Due to the Safer at Home order, all committee members are participating virtually. For virtual meetings, committee members will be muted until asked to be heard. When there's a vote, it will be necessary to take a roll call vote. A committee member will be recognized, raise their hand, and state their vote. First off, I want to recognize that we do have all our members here. Mr. McIntosh is here, Ms. Adams, and Mr. Taylor. So the committee is here. I also see Mr. Mundy, Mr. Larson, the mayor is here, Mississippi's here. So we thank everybody for being here. And Ms. Burke, thank you all for being here. We have all the folks here. There will be no items to vote on. This is an informational type meeting, but this is a very important meeting, and I appreciate everybody being here. With that, we will begin the meeting, and I'm going to ask Mr. Garrity, the city manager, to kind of introduce folks and get us rolling.
Good evening. Yeah. Good evening, Chairman Clark, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, Mayor Joins, and members of the City Council. We are here again to present the budget. This year's budget is a budget of compromises. As my predecessor, Bill Stewart, used to say, a budget is like a three-legged stool. You got to balance it by law, and those three legs of the stool are services, taxes and fees, and compensation and benefits to employees. This budget, as you will see, as Ms. Tony goes through it, again, is a budget of compromises. It's a tax revaluation year. We are adjusting the rate down, but not all the way to revenue neutral. We have significant needs on employee compensation. We have not had any adjustments in 2 years. This budget has a fair amount of compensation proposed in it, but not as much as I would prefer if we could do everything we need to do to award performance and to stay competitive. Again, it's a compromise. And then finally on the services, really the only significant service change here is creating the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which is absolutely vital, and we're the only major city in the state doesn't have one. There are many other important services that we could enhance if we had the money, but they're not in this budget. So it's a budget of compromises. As we move forward tonight, I just want to remind you that as city manager, myself and my staff, our job is to propose to you a professional recommendation on the budget. We're doing that with what's in the document tonight. It's our best proposal of what we think that would make the most sense, again, to balance all those needs and compromise. But now it becomes your budget. Staff switches roles, and our job now is to respond to your requests, to your changes, to make sure it becomes your budget, because you are the ones who are elected, duly elected, and represent the citizens, and we understand that, and we are here to respond and change it in any way that you would like. With that, Chairman Clark, I'd like to turn it over to our very, very competent budget director, Ms. Tony.
Thank you, Lee, and good afternoon, Mayor Joins, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, Chairman Clark, and members of the committee and council. I am Patrice Tony. I'm the Budget and Evaluation Director. And before we move into discussing the budget, I wanted to recognize our Citizen Budget Advisory Council. They have been meeting for months. They have reviewed many of our financial reports, our budget presentations, and they have come up with recommendations. Each year they do a report. And so at this time, I want to, well, first just acknowledge who's on the call. Nathan Bourne is our chair. Dr. Hazetta Schuler, you can wave. She is the vice chair. We have Sheila Garcia. And I believe that's it. Oh, I'm sorry, Ross Griffith. He's our newest member.
Thank y'all for being here today, and thank you for your service.
So at this time, Nathan Bourne, the chair, would like to give highlights from the CBAC report.
Super. Thank you, Patrice. It's a pleasure being here. I don't really have a really nice, pretty speech that I've prepared, but I do have some points that we want to sort of mention that we talked about during our meets. The first thing was it looks like the city has been able to find or allocate $1 million towards social justice. So we as a group, the CBAC group, we do support that measure. But we also believe that the community should be made aware of the progress and successes of any funded agencies or where that money is going. The next item was, police departments. Obviously, that's a hot topic these days. One of the things that we noticed was Winston-Salem as a city has significantly higher calls dispatched per capita than Greensboro and Raleigh. And we believe as a group that this could be an area that we can explore to try to understand the root causes for such a difference, and where we could do an improvement opportunity there. So the diversity, equity, and inclusion department, I think that's fantastic. Again, this is a topic that's on everyone's mind, and I, for one, can say that I'm pleased to live in a city with such a progressive government, and I know my group members share those same sentiments. But again, we want to make sure that we see some clear performance objectives, really for each position that's going to be involved in that department, and measurable outcomes. We believe that this new department could be a point of pride for our city, but we want to make sure that the goals are measurable and attainable, and that they're championed with our marketing department. So that was very important to us. The next thing that we had was equity as it relates to social justice. So in terms of zoning and permitting, we want to see city policies and procedures that encourage new patterns that can lead to greater equity. So kind of what we mean by that is we want to make sure that we don't have race-based zoning that could provide barriers to certain segments of our citizens. We also want to identify and implement key metrics for improvement over time with, again, specific and measurable goals. On the small business front, we want to see more mentoring and support for small startup businesses. I think this is the fabric of our city, and we really need to focus on them for sure. The last thing that we wanted to mention or take note of is that we've noticed that the city has been utilizing its fund balance reserves for the past several years in a row, and that's a concern for us. We want to see a plan to get the city back to the city's 14% policy on fund balance savings from the 10% that we currently see. So that's all that I had, but those are some of our more specific highlights.
Thank you, Mr. Bourne. Are there any other comments from any of the other Citizens Advisory Review Board? Mr. Griffith, you're on mute.
Okay, is that unmuted now?
You're unmuted. The world can hear you.
Okay, great. Right, there was a goal of 14% in our fund balance, and the budget only calls for 10%. We just, in our report, we did want to mention that we would like to see that 10% restored as part of our fund balance goal.
Okay, thank you, sir. All right. Thank you all very much, and please stay on the line. You get ready to and get the rest of the story here. Ms. Patrice, I guess, Ms. Tony, will go back to you.
Thank you, Chairman Clark, and thank you, CBAC members, for your report and recommendation and all your support through the year. Okay. So at this time, we will review the proposed budget for fiscal year beginning July 1st of 2021 through June 30th of 2022. Let's do. Okay, sorry. Okay. So we'll begin looking at the total proposed budget for FY22. We're looking at $530.9 million for FY22. When you compare that to our current year, we had $470.6 million. Keep in mind that in FY21, this current year, we were very conservative on our budget. We cut positions. We scaled back significantly based on the uncertainties of COVID-19, the pandemic, and how that will impact our budget. And so going forward, we have increased the budget. And so this budget reflects, as the city manager talked about, a budget of compromise. And I would also add of restoration and recovery, which the whole nation is going through. But this budget does reflect that and some growth. So where we see the most growth is in our property tax base. In a typical year, we see about a 2% growth from year to year in our property tax base. This year, we went through a property revaluation of real property, and our property tax base grew by 11.3%. That is significant growth. You see it in our real property, and then some in our registered motor vehicles, a little growth there. The personal property is about the same. It's actually a slight less in growth in personal property. And then public service companies pretty much remain the same. Public service companies are your gas companies, your pipeline, roadway, communications, those types of companies. So our second largest revenue source, at least for the general fund, is our sales tax. The sales tax is a little bit more unstable. It fluctuates with the economy. It is a regressive tax, meaning lower income taxpayers pay a larger portion of their income on sales tax. And so this one is just a little uncertainty. During COVID-19 pandemic, we held back on our sales tax projection. We were going through a tough economic time. During that time, however, federal government infused quite a bit of resources into people's hands with stimulus checks. And so we actually saw our sales tax numbers increase. And so looking forward into FY22, we're looking at a 2.5% growth over the 2021 year, this current year, projected year-end actuals. This growth is in line with the North Carolina League of Municipalities and what they're estimating the sales tax growth to be. It's reasonable in the sense that you don't want to over project based on how people are spending and the type of sales tax revenue, but this is still in line with what we think is achievable in terms of that revenue. Now, when we look at all funds, so when we say all funds, we have a general fund, but we also have enterprise funds and other funds that make up our total budget. So the total budget for FY22 is $530.9 million, as mentioned before. On the left-hand side, you can see the total expenditures by focus area. And so environmental health, when we look at all funds, is our largest service area, and that's because utilities is built into it. The second largest then would be public safety, and that's police, fire, emergency management. For revenues, for all funds, charges for services would be the largest piece of the pie. That's because utilities is included, and obviously you have your water bills, and then followed by property taxes and then sales tax. So here are the highlights for the budget. These are kind of big picture highlights for our FY22 budget. We're showing a property tax rate decrease by 1.5 cents. I'll explain that on a later slide. We are maintaining our core services to citizens. So even through the pandemic, the city did a great job of maintaining services, and this FY budget also maintains those services, so you don't see any reductions in this budget. So the great thing, and we heard our CBAC members mention it, because at the last report they received, we were not meeting our fund balance goals. But the great news to report is that number one, this budget does not use any general fund balance reserves, and we now are meeting our fund balance policy. And so I do have a slide to show that as well. This budget also shows the investment in a diversity, equity, inclusion office. The office consists of 4 new positions. And then it also invests and maybe reinvests in our employees. So as the city manager mentioned, the employees went without merit pay for the last several fiscal years. So this budget reinstates merit pay at an average of 2.5%. It also provides a 3.5% increase for the top performers in the organization. So they will have a performance review, and potentially top performers can get a 3.5%. The budget also reflects a full year impact of minimum wage to $15 per hour. As you recall, when we received some CARES Act funding, we were actually able to go ahead and move up a few of the employees in January to the $15 an hour. And so the budget actually includes the full year impact of that. It also provides an additional 2% increase for our public safety employees. This is for our sworn police officers and certified firefighters. This has been added to the budget most years as a retention and recruitment tool for our public safety employees. The budget also includes $4 million in increase in capital outlay. There's a number of capital outlay that we have postponed just due to budget crunches and constraints. But this year we're able to replace quite a few vehicles and equipment that were definitely dated or dangerous even. And so this allows us to do that. So that includes 75 new police pursuit SUVs. It includes a fire aerial and 2 engines. One's a replacement for fire station number 12, and one is a new engine for fire station number 13. The budget also supports community and arts-based nonprofit organizations at a $1.1 million investment from the general fund. And then there are other funds such as CDBG Home, and other federal types of grant money that funds additional support to nonprofits. I will mention here too, what's not in this budget is the American Rescue Plan Act funds. And so at this time, the budget does not include any funds or any relief from those funds, just based on us taking time to make sure that we are meeting eligible use of the funds, and so that we currently have an interim rule, and so once we kind of ensure that we understand how we can use those funds to the maximum of our ability or maximum impact, we will make some adjustments later. So drilling down to just the general fund, before you saw all funds, but when we look at just the general fund, and these would be for our basic city services like fire, police, sanitation, it's a $221.7 million budget. And you can see from the left, the general fund mainly supports people. These are salaries. Personnel is almost 70% of the overall budget. The resources for the general fund is primarily from our property taxes at 55% and sales tax at 20% for general fund. So proposed changes in positions, we've already talked about the 4 positions for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. We're adding 1 fire inspector. That fire inspector, 3 were approved several years ago, and so this is just adding the 3rd fire inspector. In our water and sewer division, we're proposing to add an assistant city attorney, and this is just to handle the constant change in regulatory environment and numerous interlocal agreements to focus on kind of the water and sewer department. They also, we're proposing to add an assistant utility plant superintendent, and that's to assist with the Safe Drinking Water Act and other duties in the water treatment division. And then in the solid waste department, they are requesting a heavy equipment operator to assist with increased levels of traffic at the solid waste facilities. So this is a general fund balance that we've talked about and that the CBAC members have referenced. For a few fiscal years, we were definitely below our policy of 14%. So our internal policy is to maintain a general fund balance reserve that is equivalent to 14% of budgeted expenditures. And so you can see in the first column, our 2020 actuals, we were at 10%. The blue section is our reserve. We appropriated $5.4 million, which was, it was a large amount because of the pandemic. And once again, just uncertainties about the impact of the pandemic. Typically, we would budget $2 million in fund balance with not the intent to use it, but just as a backup if there was a major event that happened. So moving on to what we see for estimated year end for 21, no use of fund balance reserve. So we did not put in the budget any general fund balance reserve, the typical 2 million. And so that actually increases our reserve amount. So now we are actually meeting our reserve policy, which is fantastic. And so we still have the 22.1 restricted. So total general fund balance is $55.4 million. So this slide shows the property tax rate proposal in this proposed budget. By law, we are supposed to show you the revenue neutral rate calculation. Step 1, you just take the property tax levy and you divide it by the property tax base. And then step 2 of that, we look at a 3-year tax base growth. And so you saw in that very first slide, each year how much our tax base grew. And so the average of that is 2%. And so you multiply both of those together and get 58.42 cents. So the budget reflects a 1.5 cent decrease in the tax rate. So our current tax rate is 63.74 cents. The proposed rate is 62.24 cents. So that's a reduction of 1.5 cents, and the revenue change would be $13 million. So that 1.5 cent is equivalent to $2.7 million. So what does this mean for your tax bill? That's a big question because people saw that the base grew. The average tax bill grew about 14, the value of people's home, I should say, grew about 14.8% on average. So some property owners had more value or more growth in their home value. Others had less, but on average, it was 14.8% growth. So that's what this chart reflects. So prior to the reval, your home value may have been $200,000, for an example. That means your current bill at the current rate would have been $1,275. After the reval, your home value may have grown, if it grew on average 14.8%, to $229,600. And so what we're proposing is to reduce the rate from the 63.74 rate to 62.24 cents. So then your new bill at the proposed rate would be $1,429. So that's a difference in your bill of $154 annually. So that breaks down to maybe about $16 a month on average increase on your property tax bill. So even though we're going down on the rate, you'll probably see an increase in your tax bill. So this is just the history of our property tax rate over the years. The asterisk reflects the revaluation year. And so FY22 shows the asterisk and the proposed rate of 66.24 cents. And so lastly, just to mention the proposed capital plan from 2022 to 2027. This is the capital plan, just provides a schedule of the city's capital appropriations for the next 6 years. And so the purpose is to appropriate capital needs by matching projects with the appropriate funding sources at the appropriate time. And so it's a guide, and it is subject to revisions over the next fiscal year, just based on the mayor and council's initiatives and priorities at that time. So this is updated annually. Year one, you can see we're budgeting, or at least this current year, $104 million in our capital plan. The majority of that is capital projects in the healthy environment section, which is mainly the water and sewer division. And the 6-year plan is very similar. Over the next 6 years, that's a planning time. And so, as I said, I mean, that gets updated each year as we evaluate the needs and what's needed for capital spending. And so the 6-year total is $392 million. So that ends the overall presentation. Next Thursday will be the next Finance Committee Budget Workshop. That's where I will review the community agencies, the nonprofits, and arts-based organizations that have applied for city funding in a little bit more detail. That meeting is at 5 o'clock. That same day, we will have a public hearing where many of the community agencies will join the public hearing. But what we will also do between now and that time is really get the word out about the proposed document. So anyone that wants to comment on the proposed budget, we'll do social media blitz. We will kind of push the website. We'll send out emails. We'll do posters in the recreation centers and libraries on how people can access the document and to weigh in on the proposed budget document. So that will happen on June 3rd. On Thursday, June 10th at 4 o'clock, there will be another budget workshop. At that time, there will be a consideration of a recommended budget and property tax rate. And then on Monday, June the 21st, this is the normal council meeting at 7 o'clock, will be a second public hearing and the adoption of the budget. So Chairman Clark, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. First off, thank you very much. Just to reiterate a few things, we will now take the budget up at a committee level beginning Thursday the 3rd, and that night we'll have the committee public hearing. It's not on the list, but the Public Safety Committee will be looking at the police and fire budget during this same time period, and I would suggest you look at their schedules. They normally take it up at one of their normal committee meetings. I guess it'd be the one in June coming up. So they'll take a special look at that. For the new folks, what we will do, we'll go over various budgets during each committee meeting. I will call for questions, and usually there's quite a few of them, all different areas. And the staff will accumulate those questions and provide information back. And then we keep kind of adding to that, if I can call that our little information package, as more questions come up. So the question and answer packet gets bigger as we go to get all the questions answered. It is our job as a committee and as a council to get a budget approved to start July the 1st. And as Mr. Garrity said, budgets are always compromises. We all, if we were king or queen for the day, would do something a little bit different, but we're not, and we have to somehow come up with something that appears to work. I actually have, and I'm sitting in the chamber, council chamber right now, my two books. One is on the operating budget, and one's on the capital budget. If you're in the building, and I can't tell from the backgrounds if some of y'all are or not, you will get your packets, and I'm looking at Clerk, Ms. Kenny, they will go out in the packets tonight. So your Thursday packets that will be delivered to your home shortly. We'll have them in if you haven't already gotten them. And I see Ms. Scipio's in her office. She has them. Mr. McIntosh has his. Mr. Mundy has his as well. So, and I see Ms. Adams, I know, is sitting at home, so you can expect yours this evening. So anyway, with that, are there any specific or questions, comments at this point? And we will, and again, for the non-committee members, finance committee members, you are certainly welcomed at our meetings. You will be an active participant, and if you have questions and comments, we will get those taken at that time as well. Mr. Mundy, I see your hand up. We can start with you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I think I understand this. We are meeting our goal with our reserve funds based on the operational budget revenues coming in without taking into account any of the recovery money that will still be flowing in. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that takes us, remind me if that's our 10% goal or our 14% goal.
We are meeting our 14% goal currently for FY22.
Without any ARP money. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
That's the proposed budget. We'll meet that. Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure where we are on the agenda. It looks like we're getting close to item 4, other topics for discussion.
Yeah, you certainly go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to present a proposal and a concern.
Certainly.
Is this the time, sir?
Yes, sir. You have the floor.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee and council, as you're aware, the budget that we put forth every year is a document that outlines our priority for the upcoming fiscal year. So today on finance, I wanted to present a public safety issue for your consideration. As you're aware, we have had over 7,500 homicides in America, and at least 13 of those have been in the city of Winston-Salem. Some of the violence that we've experienced has been horrible, and it had a negative effect on many families and individuals in our community. I've spoken with many of you, who have an interest in creating a public safety plan to address some of the recently increased violence. And I know that many of you agree that as a council, if we're talking about a public safety plan, the first step in executing that plan is we simply have to engage our neighborhoods that are experiencing higher volumes of crime and engage them in peace walks, community meetings, and town halls. Many of us are already doing this. I know Mayor Pro Tem Adams is doing it. I know I've done it. I know Councilwoman Burke is working on it. So we know that when neighbors are engaged in their community, they tend to be a little bit more influential than having a surge in law enforcement when it comes to reducing crime. The second part of the proposal is in line with our strategic plan. And it's also in line with the countless other public comment speakers at our meetings over the years that have called for increased money for SOAR and Youth Build. As you know, SOAR and Youth Build are great programs that the city offers for young people that may have had challenges with graduating from high school, and also with citizens that have had difficulty finding employment due to felonies and misdemeanors on their record. We know that when young people are employed, they have less reasons to commit crime. And I know many of you agree with this concept and you support it, but you want to make sure that we can expand these programs and still maintain a balanced budget. I have some good news and some not good news, but during the pandemic, some of our citizens have been at home with their families and some of them have enjoyed an extra drink or two. So the good news is that our ABC sales are up in the amount of $400,000. And as far as phase 2 is concerned, I'd make a proposition to the Finance Committee that we make a one-time commitment of the additional $400,000 in ABC sales to go towards expanding SOAR and Youth Build. The third phase of the public safety plan that I wanted to present today is to forge a partnership between the Winston-Salem Police Department and the Winston-Salem and the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office to create a task force. This task force will work with neighbors to increase patrols and community engagement in areas of our city that are experiencing higher volumes of crime. This proposed task force would consist of both sheriff deputies and the Winston-Salem Police Department officers. I've already had great conversations and meetings with Mayor Jones, Mayor Pro Tem Adams. I've also met with Sheriff Kimbrough, his command staff, Chief Thompson, her command staff, and city management. And we are all actively working on pulling this task force together and to have it implemented as soon as we possibly can. Without objection from the Finance Committee, I'd ask staff to do a little research on this proposal and bring back some information that'll help us to better consider this public safety plan that was presented today. I just want to point out that 2 of the 3 phases that I presented in this plan can be done without adding any money to the budget, which leaves us only to consider voting to add the surplus revenues from the increased ABC sales. I said a lot quickly, but I'll pause to see if there are any questions, but I'd ask staff to research it, bring us some information back, and allow the Finance Committee to make a decision from there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And I see Mr. Garrity nodding. I think he's familiar with your comments and will be bringing something to us. Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say ditto to Chairman Taylor's comments about the violence reduction efforts. I too have been meeting with some groups regarding this whole issue, and I mentioned to Mr. Garrity about the possibility of using a few dollars from the rescue plan funds, if eligible, to work with a concept called Violence Interrupter Program, which I think would be very complementary to what Chairman Taylor is proposing here. So that's something I think Mr. Garrity is looking at in terms of eligibility, and we'll hopefully have more discussion about that as we go forward. Thank you.
Mr. Garrity, then Ms. Adams. Ms. Garrity, you had a comment.
Yes, I'm familiar with the CURE Violence Interruption Program. It's been successful in some other communities, Mayor, as we've talked about. We'll come back with some options to fund it. I would probably recommend it to the committee and council that we start, which is funding it from city reserves, both proposals, so that we don't get ahead of ourselves on the ARPA money. We can always come back later this summer, early fall, and change out the source. But probably the easiest way to get it approved now is just to use some of our reserves.
Thank you. Ms. Adams.
Yes, I have had discussions with the mayor and Councilmember Taylor, the city manager, and other council members. I've also, tomorrow night, will be attending my 3rd or 4th Stop the Violence event in the urban core. What I'm hearing from citizens is that they don't feel like they're being involved in these decisions when it comes to their community. Everything is coming from the top down, and it won't work that way. So I'm asking the council, the mayor, and staff. Again, a lot of families the other night had children between 5, 12. They are concerned about our parks and our recreation centers or community centers. Yes, some of the community centers are very successful in some parts of the city, but the areas where the crime and violence is going on, I would beg to differ as well, that it's not. I would like us to look at some of the parents and guardians and grandparents and neighborhood residents. They want to participate in guiding and counseling the children. Like when I was growing up, or Councilmember Taylor or Councilmember Scipio in the urban core, there were a lot of counselors at the camps, at the recs, whether it was Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, whatever. We know that just to ask a parent or guardian to volunteer in the community, we got to look at providing resources. If we're not willing to start looking at where we can get the resources to help people be more engaged in their communities, you can pay all the public safety you want, you can form all the relationships you want, but you still have to start from the ground up with the people who are actively affected by this crime, and work collaboratively with wraparound resources. So, Mr. Garrity, I ask you and staff to look at how can we provide, much like an Upward Bound program or whatever, stipend or a incentive to parents, grandparents, and community folk in the areas where the high crime is going on. And let's be real. The crime and violence is not happening in the white communities, it's happening in the Black and brown community. So therefore, even with American Rescue Plan money, and even with all of the grants that our federal advocacies, Ms. Mazingo sent us today, 90% of those grants are for public safety, law enforcement, and those types of things. Nobody's still thinking in terms of what about the people that live in the neighborhood? So I would like us to look at starting some pilot program in our hottest areas of violence and how we can, if we have to incentivize parents and people, teachers, whoever, to show up at the rec centers to help with our children, and as well, the parents be able to input as to what programs they want to see for their community centers. Because what I'm hearing now, and we've known it for a while, we can put all of the great programs we think are great out there, but if we haven't gotten any buy-in or engagement from the people who are ultimately affected by it or who will be using it, it won't work. And right now we're at a time in history where we got to think differently on how if we want to be a community that want to be the city of arts and innovation, then we got to get innovative and create the mechanism for our community people to be involved in stopping this violence. Thank you.
Mr. McIntosh.
Yeah, I want to go back to, I want to thank the CBAC. Their report, their key work items or their key line items, I think fall in line with what we all on council want to emphasize. So I want to thank them for their work. I really appreciate their suggestions. I'm going to save my questions until I can make this book look like that book with all my tabs in it. So I will email my questions to staff and ask them to include council members in the responses. One thing I want to just really quickly touch on is that we're talking about a tax increase of double digits, and that's based on a 14% growth in property tax values. That 14% is not a tangible amount of money to people who are going to be paying higher taxes. That's like saying your stock is up 14%, and it's not up 14% until you sell it. So that gain in property value isn't spendable by folks in the community. And I'm going to pull back to what I always do and talk about impact on affordable housing. People will pay more rent for their properties when we raise property taxes. Landlords pass that through, so that will have an impact. I think we need to be mindful and keep this this increase as small as absolutely possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. McIntosh had a good point. If you do have questions as you go through the book, please email them to Ms. Tony or Mr. Rao or whoever, so that they can get going on the information before we actually get to the committee. Miss Burke, Councilmember Burke, you're up next.
Thank you so much, Chair Clark. I want to first of all say thank you to Ms. Tony for the budget presentation, and to the committee members, the citizens, I'm trying to see, Citizens Budget Advisory Council. I want to thank you also. I want to agree with everything that Mayor Pro Tem Adams said. As I have been meeting with members of my community and speaking with them about violence in our neighborhoods and violence reduction, I have heard over and over and over, we don't have programs for our kids. We need to have programs where they can be engaged in very positive activities that will help them to stay out of trouble and away from committing crimes. I have been doing a little research of my own, and I am very interested in asking the staff to do some research and provide some information on preventative programs where we can offer right in the communities where these violent acts are occurring, maybe conflict resolution practices, maybe just focusing on problem areas that we're seeing show up in our justice system, where our young people are demonstrating aggressive, violent, threatening behaviors. Just really focus on more preventative programs. I think one place that I have looked where I have been very pleased would be the YWC 18 court and the services that they offer with peers running the court and listening to the cases that come before them from their juvenile peers, counterparts from ages 6 to 17, and then sentencing their peers by, offering opportunities for them to perform community services, attend educational services, or provide some other type of restitution for their acts. So I would like to ask, again, the staff to look into preventative programs so that our young people will have something to do, and so that they will not get caught up in the criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Larson, John, you're up next.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've got a couple of questions and observations. And when we did our public survey several months back, maybe a year ago, one of the top priorities of the citizens that wrote back to us was the condition of our streets. And I need to kind of understand in this budget how much improvement for streets is going to be put in, or whether we anticipate that coming from other funding sources, but how that need will be addressed. Second thing I'm kind of interested in is the issue of parks and recreation. We did a comprehensive study of cost of deferred maintenance on our parks and recreation, and whether or not that funding is going to be in this budget at all, or how much is going to be allocated to that, or whether that's coming from infrastructure money as well, but how we're planning to address those needs. And lastly, there's a factor that has been discussed off and on, and that's sustainability. And as we talk about, for example, 75 vehicles for the police department, whether we're factoring in the cost of hybrid cars, for example, as we talk about what that budget's going to look like. Those are some issues that I'd like to be looking at. Obviously, I've not seen the capital improvement package yet, so I'm anxious to see that. And maybe that's some of those are answered, but those are questions I'll be interested in seeing in the months ahead and weeks ahead.
Councilman Larson, we'll put those on the list. Thank you. I'll offer two comments. First, and I guess I'll look to Mr. Rao since he's kind of been our expert. When do you think we will know what we can spend the American Rescue money on? And at what point will it have an impact on the budget?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Jones, Mayor Pro Tem Adams, members of the City Council. When the American Rescue Plan Act was enacted back in March, the Treasury spent those next couple of months developing their guidelines. Those guidelines were issued on May 10th. Right now, they're in a 60-day public comment period to receive input about what they call the interim final rule. So city staff right now, we've been spending the last couple of weeks reading through that rule, attending webinars, trying to discern what we can use those funds for and really understand the guidelines. We have a number of questions, and we're maintaining a list of questions that at some point we'll either directly submit to Treasury as part of the process or work through organizations like the League of Municipalities or the National League of Cities to communicate our questions. So that 60-day period obviously will end, sometime in I guess in July. At that point there will be final guidelines issued, I assume. We'll need to still sort through that, make sure we understand that before we really bring a specific proposal to you all for consideration. We are already doing some preliminary work. We've looked at the language related to reduced revenues. That's one area that we are concerned about, the language. And while we really want to at least provide our comments to Treasury. So it could still be later on in the summer, quite honestly, before we're prepared to bring specific proposals to you all. If it involves any kind of assistance to sectors of the local economy, we would want to make sure that there are very specific guidelines for you all to review and consider, so that would be how we would implement those programs if that's what we bring forward.
Thank you, sir. The other area, and I asked this as a question that staff can get back to us later on, is we have had a surge in violent shootings, however you want to define them. I would say within the last 18 months, something like that. If there's any information out there, either locally or nationally, as to why. And I don't know if, and by the way, I do not sit on the Public Safety Committee, so y'all may already have some documents or information on this, but it would be good for me for background as to what has changed that has caused this. And is that, then maybe that will help in addressing solutions to it. So any analysis in that area would be greatly appreciated. And Mr. Ralph, to go back to your comments, I think what that says is our budget will not be impacted by the American Recovery Act funds at this point, and we will deal with them when we deal with them, probably sometime, almost sounds like August, September maybe. And understanding those funds go over, I think, to 2024, something like that. So anyway.
That's correct. That we have to have the funds committed by the end of 2024, but we have all the way until 2026 to actually spend them. But we do have them obligated by the end of 2024.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Adams, you had your hand up.
Yes, again, I just want to thank the CBAC committee for always providing us with insight. They kind of help keep us on track as well. And I admire that, and we all very thankful for your service to the city and the community. Ms. Tony, Mr. Rao, thank you, and all of the staff. Mr. Garrity, that always, I'm sure you all are very happy when you go into budget cycle because it requires a lot of attention to detail. Mr. Chair Clark, the ARP money, unfortunately, we won't be able to access it and spend it as quickly as COVID and the CARES money and all of that other money, ERAP. And it's going to be a little longer time to get it right, because what the government is looking for, and as Mr. Rouse said, they want to get this more right than wrong. And that means that even if whatever plan that we come up with to spend this money, it has to be thrown back to the feds and then come back like a checklist, like a grant, and say, okay, you good to go. But one of the things that is clear, again, with the ARP money, you have to have continuous community engagement It can't be the government decides how the projects and the money and staff will be spent. Community has a voice at the table for the American Rescue Plan. One of the other things, Chair Clark, I wanted to say that the rise in violence throughout our country, for those of us that are, yes, people of color, poor people, we know what has happened, people that are challenged. These issues that have now exponentially imploded, they were always there. Poverty, blight, no opportunity, no hope, a systemic education system that is for decades and hundreds of years seem to be hell-bent on not making sure everybody gets the same education, a quality education, quality opportunity, job. All of that is, staff is going to find out, like all of us know, it's always been this way. But what COVID did was bring all of these issues to just a big explosion. And the people that have been suffering the most behind the systems that have been oppressive now find themselves, a lot of people don't care anymore. So all of the work that we do with cities and invest money in trying to make our city the city that's going to be where people want to come, work and play and raise their families, it's not, people would say it's under attack, Chairman Clark. It's not under attack. It's just always been this way, that people feel like they have no place in these cities of growth or communities. And they are now venting their emotion and their anger, and they're just tired. They're just sick and tired. So I don't think staff's going to bring anything different than that. One thing, Mr. Garrity, I'd like to know a little more detail to the council. The diversity and inclusion and equity department that we now are getting ready to create. I know that the CBAC said they wanted to see the matrix and how we're going to do this. I would be interested on the backstory of what is it you can provide council in the packages next week or when we meet. So we need to understand what these jobs are, the people, what is it they're going to be doing? What is this department going to be doing? Who are they benchmarking against? We are. So again, we have to answer back to our community as to how is it going to make our lives better? So that's what I'm interested in seeing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else out there before we adjourn? Thank you all for joining us today. We got a lot of reading to do. There's no good games on TV this weekend, so you got plenty of time. And it was in the package information, the meetings when they will take place. We will have our normal finance committee meetings as well, because other items will come up. All the committees will be meeting, of course. So let's all get to work, see what we can do. Thank y'all. Meeting is adjourned.
You.